Hey, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I am one of your hosts, Derek, and across from me over that way is normally he's that way, but today he's that way. Is my good friend and actually brother. We are family, Evan. I think we've hinted at that before, but or maybe said, I don't know. But anyways, good day to you, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All right, let's dive in here. We're doing Genesis 2:23, so I should probably have opened my Bible to that passage before this, but
just very early. Go to the first 2 pages.
Well, it's always not the first 2 pages, right? Because you got another, 7 or 8 pages, blank pages, contents, preface, all that kind of jazz, translation notes.
What's the point of the blank pages? I think that's in all Bibles. Why are they just?
It's in a lot of regular books too.
Notes. What was the point of that? You figure it'd say notes at the top. And who's taking notes in the front of the book?
It's notes, or I'm not familiar enough with book printing. Perhaps there's like there's a number, like we only print out in chunks of 10. And so if you have, 196 pages of content, well, there's going to be 4 blank pages somewhere in here. Where do you want
somewhere in the middle?
Couple at the end, couple at the beginning, couple in the middle. Yeah, maybe that'd be worthwhile.
Just for fun, or find something else to put on there.
Yeah,
that determines if they're doing a dedication or not.
Yeah, stick figure.
Do we have an extra page, or do we not?
Yeah, right. I would just like stick figure pictures.
Yeah, right. That'd be great. Just 2 pages straight of that.
Yeah, and not by the author or anything. I literally just want people at the bindery to just go ahead and just draw stick figure on it for me. Yeah,
that'd be pretty good. Yeah. I could go for it. Yeah, that would show it's an authentic copy.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, but
every copy is unique.
Yeah, exactly. If someone does know, I would. Someone should let us know if they.
It would be would be
blank pages. I don't feel like Googling it.
Right, there you go. All right, Genesis 2:23. Then the man said, "This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man." All right, now this I think is going to be a little bit of a quicker episode, although I feel like I've said that and not come through on that before. But there are a couple of points I want to highlight that are not major, going to take up a lot of time necessarily, but it's like they're enough to chew on that I don't really want to bother trying to pack a whole nother verse into this episode. So the first here I want to point out is the jubilation we see here from the man when he first sees woman. What he does here is basically shouts out a poem. This statement is more or less a in Hebrew poem form. They're short poetry. Yeah. What was that?
It's a rap.
Yeah.
He's laying down lines. He's excited.
Spitting some rhymes.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's interesting. This is the first quote we see from him. And I find that interesting. It's not that he hasn't spoken in the narrative. He must have spoken to name all the other animals. If we take it as a story or whatnot. But this is the first time we see a quote. And that's interesting. I think if we can sort of look at that symbolically within the story here for a second, what we see is there's sort of a sense of wholeness, I think, that he feels in seeing the woman as she completes him, since he was just torn in half and sewed back together. It's the wholeness that he now feels again, the completeness that sort of restores him to kind of what he was before, but in a greater way than he was before, right? Because what he was before was not good, and then God did this to correct that not good. So he's restored, but into something even greater. And it's that moment and that idea that we finally have something that is worth him saying something within this story.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting.
I think there's 2 things with that. The first with the word is we just got through, I think 2 chapters ago, a creation narrative that surrounded the spoken word. That spoke to the power of the spoken word and said that word is so significant that it is the thing that causes creation to happen. That's how significant your spoken word is. And now the very first thing he says is this declaration. So it's got to be significant.
Right.
And then secondly, the thing you're describing, G.K. Chesterton has this he talks about it's a story he never actually wrote, but he said he wanted to write. But it's better as just an illustrated short story of a traveler who leaves England, a discoverer who leaves England, and by some strange storm or something like that, gets off course and arrives back in London. And he has this moment that he likes to describe in which he has both the jubilation of coming home and of discovering something new.
Right.
And
right.
that's a strange combination of feelings, but I think it's something that we sometimes feel as humans.
Yes.
I think that does hit at actually something real. And that would be something that you might say Adam is feeling here.
Yeah, a lot of people say it feels like home, right? Even though it's something new, they'll say, "Oh,
I've never been here before, but it feels
like home, right?"
Yeah. And it's weird that we're able to feel that, but also I think that's what might be. That's the emotion that he's feeling at that time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we're going to talk about this more next verse, but I think what this kind of emphasizes is actually this jubilation, this celebration, is sort of the importance of marriage as the union between man and woman, right? This is the jubilation he has about that union. And what he says, that literally the next verse, starts with, "This is why," right? This feeling that he feels in this moment is why we go on to the next verse, which describes sort of marriage, the union between man and woman. So the other part of this verse that is interesting, and we've hinted at this before, is here the man names the woman. And we've talked about this before, the naming thing implying sort of this sense of authority and responsibility for, and all of these kind of things. This time, though, I think it's a little bit different. It doesn't quite carry that same connotation. That's for a couple of different reasons. This is actually the first time we see the individual term for man in Hebrew used as well. So everything prior to this was like humanity. That was the idea wrapped up in everything that was said prior. It's what the man says here is the first time he says the word for individual man that exists in Hebrew. And that's kind of interesting. So what we're seeing then is not, he's naming himself at the same time as the woman, while also saying, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." In other words, they're equals, right? That is what he is saying here, is we are equals. And so she is a part of him, and naming her is the same as naming himself. It's all one, it's all even, it's all equal with each other, right? So it doesn't carry quite that same sense of authority and responsibility that's been associated with naming prior to this point. At least not with regards to each other, right? But I think what's especially interesting here is that God allows for the self-naming of the man and the woman. And that's weird, right? That means that the man and woman are given a level of authority and responsibility over themselves that we've not seen afforded to anything else within creation up to this point. Everything else in creation has either been beneath God, named by God, or beneath man, named by man. Nothing has named itself, right? The creatures were all named by man, and everything else named by God, and nothing has named itself. But humans, man and woman, get to name themselves. So that's interesting, right? And it sets man and woman apart from all of the rest of creation in God's order of things, which, given with the whole image of God idea, makes sense. What it also does, which is interesting, is it sets the idea of the individual as being somewhat separate from humanity as a whole, in terms of this idea of authority and responsibility. Because God had previously named humans in their creation in Genesis 1. We see God saying it, right? We talk about a lot of Genesis 1 is and God said, and so it was, right? This was an actual quotation from God, is him naming humanity as a whole. So, but yet the individuals can name themselves. That is very interesting to me, right? So there's some way in which God has authority over all humanity, and this naming of all humanity and everything that's sort of associated with that. Yet he rescinds some of that, or takes some of that back on the individual level. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting enough here. However, I think it has wonderful symmetry with the idea of salvation within Christ, right? Where God will hold all of humanity to account for themselves. Mm-hmm. However, the individual, through the cleansing blood of Christ, may find a path to redemption. So they have that sort of authority and responsibility over themselves to that extent. They can't do it for all humanity, but for the individual, they can. So I think we see kind of a reflection of that level of responsibility that is later told in the story of salvation. I think we see that here this early on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
there's a weird way in which we've talked about this before, but which you have to be able to hold seemingly contrasting ideas in unison in order to sometimes make sense and to make things make sense. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that God has full control over humanity, but also man, in some way, a single man has control over himself. It's like you have to be able to hold both of those ideas in unison. Yes. You know, it's the same idea of you have control over what you do with your life, even if you're put in bad situations by your life mm-hmm. that are beyond your control. It gets at the idea of the serenity prayer of saying, look, I know that there's things that I don't control, and there's things that God has control over, but I still am in charge of naming myself and taking responsibility for myself and doing the things that I can. Yep. You know, and that does come to the culmination in salvation. And where people get hiccups is they argue on the extremes of both sides, or they argue one side to the negation of the other. Mm-hmm. Of saying mm-hmm. like, look, you're just the result of your circumstances, and there's no possibility. You don't have any responsibility for yourself. Or you have sole responsibility for yourself, and you're not the result of any of your circumstances. Yes. You know, God has full sovereignty over humanity, mm-hmm. and man has or woman, single individuals have no responsibility, or single individuals have all responsibility, and God has no sovereignty. Right. And so it's like somehow and here we see this story, it's both are true. Yeah. And so those somehow have to be held in equal standing in your mind in order to actually understand the way the world actually works. Right. Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of big enough for this episode. You know, I mean, I don't have much more to say on this verse, but I do believe that those two ideas are kind of enough on their own to chew on for a little bit, warranted their own episode. I didn't want to muddy the waters with anything else. So with that, we will say goodbye until next time. Be sure to like, subscribe, rumble, share with friends, sign up for our mailing list in the link in the show notes, and send us the email on schooltheology@protonmail.com, and tell anyone who you think might find this kind of discussion interesting. We'll put it that way. And until then, we'll see you next time.